Dragon Ball GT is the black sheep of the Dragon Ball franchise, and that's why I'm choosing to tackle it in this video, as opposed to giving you the 500th ranking of who's the best between Frieza, Cell, and Buu, and why the answer is Frieza. Even the old movies are generally being accepted by the fandom now, when so many of those movie bad guys are showing up everywhere. But the same can't be said for GT. GT was made with next to no involvement from Akira Toriyama, and Super was made to directly replace it. There's 1,000 reasons as to why GT is so bad, and you'll get a decent taste of those reasons even throughout this top 10 list that highlights the best of GT. That said, GT does have some redeeming factors and ideas in it. Not everything in it is just complete trash. Since we're going to be getting into some villains of questionable quality before we're even out of the top 10, we're going to start with the best villains first. Baby blows the other villains from GT completely out of the water. His only real competition from GT is Omega Shenron, but even the Fighter Z devs seem to agree with me for once, that Baby is the primary reason to give GT a look, if you want to get something positive out of it. Baby is a super weapon created by the Tuffles. The Tuffles are a race made up for GT that was genocided by the Saiyans. He has Tuffle DNA inside of his body and is actually loyal to the original people who created him, wanting to get revenge on those Saiyans. Unfortunately for Baby, most of his revenge has been stolen from him by Frieza long before he awakened, seeing as Frieza blew up the planet and killed them all already. That said, Baby correctly identifies Vegeta as the one Saiyan who had something to actually do with his planet's destruction, targeting him specifically over the other Saiyans. As a parasitic creature, he takes over Vegeta's body to use as his primary host. He takes all of Vegeta's family and friends for his own, spreading his parasitic virus to all of them to convert them to his cause too. Vegeta is trapped as a hostage in his own body, witnessing all of this. Perhaps the greatest pain, though, for the egotistical Vegeta might be that Baby comes closer to besting Goku in combat than Vegeta ever does, which has always been the biggest wish of Vegeta's life. Planet Vegeta is not originally the native homeworld of the Saiyans, and was instead originally the planet of Baby's race, the Tuffles. Vegeta's father apparently named the planet after himself after conquering it, much to the anger of Baby, and then he made it their new home base.
In his greatest moment of arrogance, renamed the planet after himself!
When Baby has total control of Earth and has the Dragon Balls at his disposal, he wishes for something surprisingly not villainous. While his people and planet have unfortunately been dead for too long for Shenron to just casually revive them, he creates a new version of his planet just as it was, within Earth's orbit. While he cannot bring back his people, he intends to do his best to start his race over. Baby considers everyone he infects with his virus to have Tuffle DNA in them, considering them as part of his race and welcoming them with open arms as his followers. Baby immediately organizes a mandatory evacuation of Earth, forcing all of his subjects to live on his new planet as the Tuffles. The people Baby brainwashes are not mindless slaves either. They still clearly retain their personality and memories. Their allegiance just flips over to Baby. Keeping in mind that this is also Vegeta's homeworld he lost at the hands of Frieza, it adds another layer of irony that Baby is the only character who shows any desire to bring it back, rather than the good guy Saiyans in the show, much less the character who shares his name with that planet, Vegeta. It's almost like Baby's guilt-tripping Vegeta, by doing far more for his people than the Prince of all Saiyans ever did for his. While normally the protagonists are the ones who care about collateral damage, Baby refuses to use certain attacks in his fight against Goku, for fear he might destroy his beloved planet. He's pretty much the only big Dragon Ball villain to have ever cared about the lives of his followers, beyond maybe one or two here or there.
That's fine, but will I be able to control my own actions under that power? I don't want to demolish my own planet, I just want to kill the Saiyan.
While everyone is brainwashed by Baby, the people show legitimate respect for their leader like he's some sort of god rather than being unwilling slaves. He's celebrated in parades, everyone's ecstatic to move to the new planet, and perhaps most revealingly, The entire population of Earth is cheering Baby on as he fights Goku. This is already something I found incredibly humorous, but it's amplified tenfold when Baby is fighting Goku in his gigantic golden grade 8 kaiju form, while Goku is a tiny little insect by comparison. Baby even makes a mockery of the Spirit Bomb with his Revenge Death Ball, where he takes the hatred and spite of his followers rather than their life force. The people eventually begin referring to Baby by a title, the Honorable Baby.
I, the Honorable Baby, sent that pathetic Saiyan to the next world with my own hands.
He could have chosen something more menacing, like Baby the Conqueror or whatever, but it's clear that Baby legitimately thinks of himself as the good guy. It's a far more interesting dynamic than being the millionth Dragon Ball villain who generically wants to murder all life. While there are other villains who want universal conquest, Baby's endgame is a lot more interesting than theirs. If he was so obsessed with revenge, he could have revived Nappa and Frieza with the Dragon Balls, who are still rotting in GT's version of Hell, and could casually just torture them for more revenge. While revenge is still a huge aspect of Baby's character, he still wants to be a leader first and foremost. While Baby does passively refer to his people as his slaves, the only people Baby really treats as somewhat disposable at times are the other Saiyans who he's brainwashed, attacking them when they get in his way or they're incompetent or something. He orders a brainwashed Gohan and Videl to murder their own daughter if they can't convert her to the Baby cult. And they try to do it. That's how 100% into the brainwashing they are. Baby is definitely getting pleasure out of this since he could just do it himself. Pan is not someone who's hard to kill. He could definitely do it with no problem. Yes, he does eventually start using his own people as hostages by attacking them and forcing Goku to shield them, but this is apparently the great ape side of him, causing him to lose parts of his rationality. And even then, he only did it because he was desperate. It was a risk that he had no choice but to take if he wanted to beat Goku. And he clearly shows that he didn't want to become the great ape in the first place because he was afraid of this exact situation happening. As far as how Baby fights, he's most famous for his golden grade 8 form, and that's something I'm definitely a big fan of. After Vegeta transforms into a grade ape in Dragon Ball Z, that transformation is ever used by anyone again until here in GT. And even in GT, nobody else becomes a grade ape. The ape form has pretty much become Baby's signature at this point, with the video games using it as his primary method of attack. It's not just Fighter Z. Most video games have opted to choose Baby as the sole representative of GT. And Fighter Z is pretty much the sole exception where Grade 8 hasn't been his primary form, which is just because of gameplay restrictions. Most notoriously, in fighting games where he's allowed to be in this form 24/7 like Budokai Tenkaichi 3, he's often pretty absurdly overpowered. Baby stacks the power multipliers of the Grade Ape and Super Saiyan forms on top of each other simultaneously. While Vegeta's tail that enables this transformation was cut off long ago in DBZ, Baby gets it scientifically reconstructed and it is again cut off when Baby is finally forced out of Vegeta's body, meaning that while Vegeta gets to see this glorious form while being held hostage inside his own body, he's only given a taste of it and is never able to truly use it again. Baby continues to talk with telepathy with his usual voice in the Grade 8 form, but when he speaks out loud to laugh or taunt Goku, he has the usual demonically deep voice Grade Apes have. Considering he spends a very, very long time in this form, it would get tiring hearing him talk with the dull demonic rumble voice 24/7, but it's nice to still hear it on occasion. While we're on this topic, Baby's regular voice is also a real treat to listen to. Hatred and spite is oozing out of just every single word this guy says.
Saiyans never learn. Haven't you followed anything? Please, use what little brain you have. Vegeta transformed into the gorilla. I did not. I am the parasite. I control him, and I'm not limited to just his body. I can use his feeble Saiyan mind if I so desire, to connect directly to yours.
Baby's history before he starts possessing people on Earth is much more strange. Baby has to carry the majority of GT on his back, and the most difficult task of all is that he has to transition out of the terrible episodic Black Star Dragon Ball saga of the first 16 episodes. He retroactively gets credit for the actions of some of the worst villains through his minion, Dr. Mew, but I can't say these terrible early episodes are in any way his fault, as he's not on camera during that time. Dr. Mew was apparently trying to recreate Baby, but the one Dr. Mew was working on was just an incompetent reconstruction. His real introduction is when he pops out of Dr. Mew's chest, revealing that the Doctor was somehow a robot he programmed, which doesn't make a lot of sense, to say the least. It creates a big chicken and the egg scenario as to who exactly came first. It almost makes me wonder if Dr. Mew was just some sort of robot suit Baby was controlling from the inside, but Dr. Mew later reappears without the involvement of Baby, so I can safely say that Dr. Mew is a separate character who can be held responsible for his own stupidity. Regardless, this bizarre introduction doesn't give the best first impression to Baby. Once Baby is finally free to move around, he starts in a considerably weaker state and has to use his own abilities rather than just relying on the power of his hosts and minions. Considering how little he starts with, I definitely say he earned the massive amount of power he enjoys later. He hops around from body to body as hiding from the protagonists, but shows that he can enter those bodies with shockingly high speed and ease in this fight scene against several of the other Saiyans on Earth. Considering how high of a power level everyone is now, it makes sense for him to be able to do this so fast. Baby's power set makes sense to be so threatening at high levels, rather than just having to take the narration's word for it that this villain is 1,000,000 times stronger than the last villain, he's the most powerful villain ever! And the protagonists also don't just stand around doing nothing while he takes 10 million years to fire his instant win attack, or something like that. Omega Shenron has been called generic countless times over the years, and I was fully expecting him to be coming into it. But I was pretty pleasantly surprised. I think most of his negative stigma comes from Dragon Ball originally ending with him as the most powerful villain ever, which feels pretty unsatisfactory by comparison to Boo, but that's not really his fault. The concept of the 7 Dragon Balls becoming 7 sentient shadow dragons that are used against the protagonist is an interesting one, and something that feels like a saga much more in line with Dragon Ball Z by comparison to the rest of the sagas of the show. Each of the dragons was specifically born from a wish, so Goku's excessive reliance on them comes back to haunt him here. Omega criticizes Goku for his overuse of the balls despite the warnings of Elder Kai, and it seriously hits home for Goku that he couldn't save people without using them. Omega Shenron's main gimmick is that he absorbs the Dragon Balls of the other 6 Shadow Dragons besides himself, adding their power to his. In many cases, I would argue that he honestly uses their powers a lot more competently than the original users did, mostly with Rage's powers. While some of the other powers he barely uses beyond just demonstrating that he has them, not all of them are that useful if we're being honest. There's not much purpose to firing a beam with a different element behind it. The fact that he does have those powers does make it more interesting to watch fight though. While the guy doesn't have much in the way of original powers that he came up with himself because he absorbs the others so quickly when he appears, he does have one great signature move to himself that is not copied and that actually makes use of his design. All of those random spikes jutting out of his body everywhere are not just for show, and if that wasn't enough, he then uses Rage Shenron's electricity to electrocute them while they're still impaled on his back, just to make sure they're dead. Omega Shenron only bothers to show up in the saga after 5 of the other 6 Shadow Dragons are dead, and he makes his introduction by killing the 6th. Using his own power, he's really not that impressive, and I think he'd get pretty easily bodied by Rage Shenron at least if he didn't have the power of the other dragons at his fingertips. I could easily see an excellent arc though, where Omega Shenron has to go around fighting and absorbing his fellow Shadow Dragons throughout the course of the saga, rather than just having their corpses handed to him on a silver platter after having done none of the work. As is, Omega Shenron is in less than 10 episodes by comparison to Baby, having a much more full saga dedicated to himself. He still gets way more than the other Shadow Dragons, but that's not saying much when the others get anywhere from 1 to 3. I still think he's good, but to compete with the other great villains, he would need to be much more actively involved throughout the saga, rather than just a final boss fought at the end of it. By comparison to other big-time Dragon Ball villains, Omega never really has to work for that much. Everything, to be an all-powerful god, is just given to him for free. The one Shadow Dragon that Omega does get to interact with is Nova, the one good aligned Shadow Dragon. After executing him initially, Nova is the only one with a will strong enough to oppose Omega to come out from his Dragon Ball and challenge him again, after the Dragon Balls briefly get knocked out of Omega's body, presumably because Nova is the only one who's not evil. When Nova first comes out of his ball, Omega lets his guard down because he thinks his corruption of the Dragon Balls has turned him evil again. You could argue that's a stupid mistake on Omega's part, but keep in mind, he's not dumb enough to think that Nova has willingly changed to the dark side. He thinks it's some kind of brainwashing effect. Once Nova regains his senses, Omega's fight against him inside the magma is easily one of the biggest highlights of Omega's screen time. Omega still banishes Nova back inside of his body at the end of it, but it gives him a much more meaningful conflict that's relevant to his character on a more personal level than just fighting Goku, giving him a more direct rival. This is the one time Omega has to actually earn something, and it's quite entertaining to watch. This is also important because it's a setback for him that he has to overcome, rather than just generically being all-powerful all the time. I only wish something like this happened with the other 5. Maybe if not having them directly pop out to antagonize Omega Shenron, they could come out to help him as minions at some point. I understand that he hates Nova given the fact that he's the opposite in alignment as the rest of them, but we don't even know what he thinks of the others. General Rilldo is the closest thing to a main villain in the series outside of the 3 designated ones. As his boss, Dr. Mew, can't fight and he's incredibly incompetent. Rilldo was the most requested character to be added into Budokai Tenkaichi 3, which had no GT villains outside of the main 3, and has basically every character from Z, the movies, and original Dragon Ball already. He's first introduced by killing one of the worst villains in the series, so Rilldo definitely has a strong start. He's somewhat similar to Baby in that while he does share his creator's goal in changing all life into machine mutant life like him, he's a surprisingly benevolent boss to his men. At one point, his robots are scared of him when he's angry and crackling with energy. Seeing this, Rilldo informs his men that they don't have to be afraid of him, and that only his enemies should be.
No. Don't be frightened of your general, my faithful servants, no. Only one should be worried, and his name is Goku.
The only time he could be viewed as a bad boss is when he absorbs the Sigma Force into his body, but they previously fused with each other completely willingly, and they don't seem at all upset about fulfilling what is obviously supposed to be their primary function. The most direct case of Rilldo being a good general is how he handles Giru. Giru is a side character robot who follows the protagonist around everywhere, but he originates from Rildo's planet and was supposed to act as a spy, stealing Goku's Dragon Balls to give to Rilldo. The general throws an award ceremony for him where he gives him a Medal of Honor, and constantly praises Giru. He says that he's going to be the most decorated unit ever, from how many awards he will receive, and that he's useful beyond words. And a plot twist, literally everybody saw coming, Giru betrays Dr. Mew later when Rilldo is not there. But Giru had absolutely every reason to stay with his fellow machines with how well they all treat him, particularly Rilldo. The only time Rilldo messes up a bit is telling Giru to hurry up angrily when he's agitated after a fight. But by villain standards, that's pretty tame, especially after he's been so nice up until now. By comparison, the protagonists have constantly abused Giru both verbally and physically, so it's nothing short of a mystery as to why Giru chose to side with them instead of Rilldo and go against his programming. When the Sigma Force first captures Goku on Rildo's planet, he loudly states his frustration about how aggravated he is that Dr. Mew will not allow him to just murder Goku.
If it were me, I'd terminate them right now. But no, Dr. Mew's orders are to keep them alive.
He deserves major plus points for this, given Goku obviously leads to his faction's downfall. Rilldo goes a step further though, and takes extra precautions against Goku by having the Sigma Force watch and observe all of Goku's fights Giru recorded up until now, to train them against Goku. This is despite the fact the Sigma Force have already defeated Goku, so I definitely say that makes Rilldo pretty competent with how extensively he's preparing, where other villains would just see no threat at all. When Goku inevitably escapes and the Sigma Force are defeated somehow, he goes to fight Goku himself for one of the best fight sequences the show has to offer. Rilldo has a lot of cool attacks, even if they're spread out across several forms. In his base form, he has rocket hands that he can control remotely when they're not attached to his body, and he has a metal beam which he can use to instantly freeze people inside of metal, an obvious allusion to Han Solo's fate in Star Wars. He later absorbs the Sigma Force into his body to gain armor and new abilities, with the big highlight being a gigantic drill that is far bigger than the drill he absorbed in the first place, bringing to mind another shonen series. When he takes his final form, Rilldo basically becomes Magneto, having control over all metal everywhere, able to morph it into liquid metal and reconstruct it into other things, throw it through the air, and hide inside of it. The planet he's on is entirely made out of metal, and he claims that to kill him, Goku would have to destroy the entirety of it, as he can just reform out of metal anywhere. This one shot of him popping up with 3 heads in particular is pretty great, as he continues to taunt Goku.
You can fight me all you want, but until you rid this planet of all the metal covering it, I will always have a body to bring to the battle. Now, if you don't know, this is the part where you concede and make the smart decision to hand yourself and the other Saiyan over to Dr. Mew.
After a long fight, he eventually whips out his power from the start, the metal beam ray to instantly trap people, to defeat Goku and Pan. It's honestly pretty rare villains in this series bother to remember powers they used in the past or from previous forms, so this is nice to see. Rilldo defeats all of the protagonists without fail, despite his incompetent allies and the strict unnecessary restrictions from his boss. The only reason they get out is because of Dr. Mew's incompetence. Dr. Mew even tries to summon General Rilldo back into the room once the heroes escape, but is prevented, so Rilldo unfortunately never learns about it. The next time we see Rilldo is after Mew has already been killed, and he tries to stop the heroes from escaping the planet and their ship by latching onto it and holding it down. It is then an absolutely tremendous letdown when we see them generically kill Rilldo with ki blasts. This man has defeated them all single-handedly, and apparently can just reform his body out of metal anyway, so this should in no way kill him. It's laughably lazy on the writer's part and incredibly disappointing. There is an explanation as to why he's so pathetic here, as apparently he was infected with Baby's virus. While Baby has a much better arc and is a superior villain to Rilldo, the introduction of it is very rocky as he abruptly hijacks Rilldo and Mew's arc. The basic idea here is that Baby is artificially limiting Rilldo and basically forcing him to suicide. I guess to make use of all the metal on the planet, Rilldo has to be in the metal form, which Baby is not allowing him to use or something. Baby's character is more awkward when he first attains full sentience, as he's primarily concerned with just surviving, so I guess I can't blame him too much for this. But it's a real shame he just wasted Rilldo like this. It would be great to see Rilldo have a role beyond serving the terrible villain of Dr. Mew, and to serve under Baby as his right-hand man instead. They're both bosses who value their own people, and with the Parasite just changing what race Rilldo values, I think they'd honestly get along pretty great. Baby is a way better boss to work for than Mew. Rilldo does get to come back in the Hellfighter 17 arc, as he and all the other villains escape from Hell. He does get slightly more respect in that fight as he turns Gohan's limbs to metal. It's implied he would beat him in a 1v1 before Oob comes to save Gohan, but he's still largely just a background character without much plot relevance and quickly dies again. This is yet another wasted opportunity to do more with Rilldo, considering the fact that Dr. Mew plays a very important role in this arc and survives until the end. Dr. Mew and General Rilldo never even interact with each other outside of one scene, Rilldo's introduction, where he just talks to Mew over a television screen. Rilldo can't catch a break with the writers having other villains steal his much-deserved spotlight. He's never really given a good send-off. Rilldo has a pretty serious-sounding voice actor, but the funny thing about it is that he shares his voice actor with GT's narrator. This is especially obvious when an episode ends with Rilldo talking, for the narrator immediately picks up after he finishes. The narrator often talks up Rilldo as being super strong. It's hilarious to imagine that's General Rilldo who is retelling the events of the series.
This is the part where you concede and make the smart decision to hand yourself and the other Saiyan over to Dr. Mew.
General Rilldo divulged the secret of his awesome power, making him even closer to invincible. Can Goku find some way to destroy all of the metal on the planet?
Can Goku defeat the great and handsome General Rilldo? Find out on the next exciting episode of GT. Rage Shenron is an episodic antagonist with one episode. With Omega Shenron and Baby out of the way, that's already two of the show's three main villains. So most of the other characters here are far more minor. Rage is this high entirely for cool powers and being the strongest villain other than the three above him who are actually supposed to be strong. In his base form, Rage is a small little imp of a dragon who wouldn't look out of place as a generic enemy in a Dragon Quest game. However, by absorbing electricity, Rage can increase in size, turning into a massive goop monster. It's slightly more interesting than just a standard size increase too, as the little Rage Shenron is still inside of the giant goop monster, located inside of his Dragonball. He will even come out and make himself vulnerable to taunt Goku in that form, and much to my surprise, the guy is so absurdly powerful that Goku can't even punish him for that display of arrogance. Rage manages to fully display the extent of his powers in the extremely limited amount of screen time he gets. He seems entirely impervious to ki-based attacks like beams. It's not just because he's generically strong either. Much more interestingly, he uses his goop monster body to bounce back ki at Goku, which forces him out of his Super Saiyan 4 form. After that, Rage manages to restrain Goku and Pan effortlessly with his goop tentacles, electrocuting them to the point Goku assumes he will die and is starting to black out. So, how is this guy robbed of his victory? Nobody else shows up, and it's nothing else either of his opponents do to fight against him. Rage Shenron is defeated because it starts to rain. Goku does literally nothing to stop Rage Shenron, he just sits there and watches as Rage's body is reduced to nothing and he's forced back to his base form. It reminds me of Clayface from Batman, an absurdly overpowered character who can only be dealt with by happening to have his weakness around. But by comparison to Clayface, Goku doesn't force him into the water or something, it just happens to rain, and Goku has no idea about this weakness until Rage spontaneously is defeated by it. Since Omega Shenron has Rage's powers, would he have just immediately died too if it randomly started raining? What a great ending that would have been. This was shaping up to be an actual great Dragon Ball fight, something extremely rare in GT, but the fact it ends this way is super disappointing. Rage sarcastically says that Goku and Pan have earned this Dragon Ball when they come to take it out of his body, in the most hollow victory Goku's ever had in any form of Dragon Ball media, but he at least makes one last-ditch attempt to attack Pan before he's killed. Rage is so powerful that when Omega Shenron has all of the dragons absorbed, he's constantly using Rage's abilities specifically, most notably his ability to regenerate. The powers of the other dragons are mostly just used once to generically show off that he has them, but Rage's powers are practically used more than his own powers. If there's an original villain in GT with missed potential, it's definitely Rage. Rage's personality is simplistic and nothing to write home about, but a generic psychotic villain who laughs gleefully at the demise of his enemies is pretty enjoyable when the character is powerful enough to back it up for once and isn't all talk. Goku argues Rage is stupid for spreading himself out so far so that he could not take cover from the rain, and unfortunately that is somewhat true. Rage isn't that dumb. He's smart enough you'd think he could just check a weather forecast or fight indoors somewhere, something to alleviate his weakness. Being set back by his pride could be an interesting development to the fight and let Goku get out of Rage's death grip, but having it just defeat him entirely by itself is awful handling as the fight just ends out of nowhere. All of the dubbed Shadow Dragon names are pretty stupid, but can I also just say that Rage is a very weird name for him? If he's any of the 7 deadly sins, he's clearly pride. Aside from the reason of his downfall, he takes great pride despite how small he is before, in his words, showing that big things come in small packages, much like another pride. Gluttony's not a bad fit for him either, but as far as Rage, the guy never really is all that angry in the first place. He's usually successful, and when he does lose to the rain, he's more shocked than angry. Naturon Shenron is an average at best fighter, but he makes up for it by largely relying on trickery and avoiding fights where possible. His favorite tactic is using hostages, as he seems to enjoy destroying things for the sake of it. Naturon forces the protagonist to save people while he casually goes about on his way. While in his first form, he just wants to go around causing earthquakes, and his stupid song that he sings before he spontaneously ends it in "Earthquakes rule!" because he couldn't think of anything else is pretty funny. When they finally corner Naturon down, he attempts to make good use of his ground powers to cause beams of energy to shoot up from the earth. Unfortunately, ground powers are drawing a super short straw when everybody in the series can fly, something that's addressed in the show, so Naturon comes up with a pretty competent alternative strategy. He pretends to be an idiot and lets them think that Goku has fooled him as he intentionally takes the bait and attacks himself to knock himself out. It's clear this fight isn't going anywhere with the limited powers he currently has at the time anyway. He reduces himself to a form that's just as Dragon Ball as he goes to absorb Pan when she picks it up. Natron's apparently some kind of body snatcher character, as it's revealed the previous purple form he was using was done by him possessing a generic mole. After absorbing Pan, he turns into some kind of giant frilled lizard. I'm not really sure on the logic there, but I guess regardless of who absorbs, he's still a giant dragon, just a slightly different one. Naturon later says that he wanted to absorb the far more powerful Goku instead of Pan. I have to assume he was hoping that Goku would fall into the trap, as I doubt he has all that much sentience when he's just a regular Dragon Ball. It's not like Goku stops Pan from getting absorbed, he just stands there, so it's reasonable to assume that it would have worked if he'd absorbed Goku instead. The guy had a 50-50 shot, he just got unlucky. With Pan absorbed, Naturon mocks Goku in some enjoyable dialogue where he sarcastically calls him Grandpa since he has Pan absorbed.
What have you done with my granddaughter? Let Pan go right now!
What do you mean? There is no Pan. I'm your grandchild now. Come here and give me a hug, Grandpa.
The one power he seems to gain from Pan is the ability to perform a Kamehameha, and having a giant dragon monster perform it while saying the name of the technique with his stupid sounding voice definitely got a chuckle out of me.
And forgive me if I use an old family tradition. Kamehameha.
Unfortunately, after losing his Earth powers because of not having the mole absorbed, his new fighting style is pretty generic. The entire gimmick of the fight is that he has Pan absorbed as a hostage. He goes around murdering people at random in a rampage while Goku can't attack him, and is incredibly egotistical about it the whole time. Eventually, he forces Goku to make the choice to kill Pan when he's murdering so many other people anyway. If he was more competent, he'd try to negotiate here rather than being so sure of himself, but I definitely enjoy how smug this character is. For whatever reason, Naturon is strong enough to survive Super Saiyan 4 Goku's most powerful attack, and performing this attack greatly weakens and tires out Goku. He's able to beat on Goku long enough to the point he's blatantly won the fight, and only loses because of gloating over his opponent some more. Naturon plays on the fact that he's a Shenron, and says he will grant Goku a wish of seeing his granddaughter one last time, removing her partially from his body just to taunt Goku. At this point, Goku, unsurprisingly, just casually pulls Pan out of Naturon's body, which forces him into a pathetic state without anything absorbed where he instantly loses. While Natron's gloating over his opponents can be enjoyable, this is awfully stupid on his part. It's baffling how powerful this character apparently is. He's apparently right to be egotistical, and the only time he was particularly scared of Goku before he lost, he generically survived the attack anyway. Like with Haze Shenron, it's quite dull to see Goku getting yet another undeserved victory. Why is Naturon forced into this true form state when he's defeated the second time, instead of turning into a Dragon Ball like when he was defeated the first time? The true form is clearly 100% useless, so if he just turned into a Dragon Ball again, he could apparently just try to absorb Goku again. It's confusing that in the first instance, he apparently just was the Dragon Ball, and the second time he's a separate entity from it who could be killed, given he never resurfaces out of the Dragon Ball again after this. With the fact he can act separately as a Dragon Ball, you'd think this guy might just spontaneously pop out of it at some point like how Nova Shenron did. Apparently, Naturon could also theoretically just absorb his fellow dragons the same way Omega did with how his powers work, if he was only more ambitious. It seems like Naturon's personality might be somewhat related to what he absorbs, as he becomes significantly more proactive and less lazy after he leaves his mole body behind. I can understand if he just wanted to remain uninvolved in the conflict, but you can't be some neutral party when you also have an addiction for destroying cities. You can't have it both ways. Aside from the mistakes Naturon made in this fight, he really should have committed more to either being a more ambitious villain or just minding his own business. Bulma is not exactly somebody you would expect to be brought up on a villain's list. And no, she doesn't have a fight scene or anything. However, this is based entirely on the Bulma who supports Baby during the events of his saga while under the influence of his virus. The vast majority of characters are all supporting Baby to the best of their ability, but Bulma does more than the rest of them combined, being more than just some hired goon. She uses her nearly infinite money to create the transportation ship needed to move everyone to their new planet after Baby wishes back Planet Tuffle, showing that she's the real person in charge of Capsule Corp at the end of the day, not her non-character father, or her son who hates being there for some reason. Seriously, why is Trunks the CEO of Capsule Corp and GT when he refuses to do his job? Bulma only decides to take charge once she's been infected with the Baby parasite. She invents a device to enable Baby to attain ultimate power as a Golden Grade Ape without the need for a tail, something she never saw fit to bother creating for Vegeta. While she does try to repurpose the device later on once she's free of Baby's control to help Vegeta, she's only able to turn him into a Golden Grade Ape for about 5 seconds. The form remains exclusive to Baby. She also uses her machine to heal Baby back to full health. Don't you think Vegeta could have used that when he was getting impaled and shocked to death by Omega? Bulma is the only person Baby ever directly thanks or praises, and she legitimately deserves it. She's very prominently seen with Baby all the time during the saga as his clear second-in-command and spokesperson. For all intents and purposes, Baby has clearly taken Vegeta's wife from him. There's obviously no on-camera romantic involvement between them, but she's practically interacted with Baby more than Vegeta and all of Z, let alone GT. The relationship with Vegeta is mostly just a background cliff note. No character in all Dragon Ball media has ever so destroyed another character so badly as Baby has to Vegeta, and the man has stiff competition with Frieza there. Now, it's easy to argue that Bulma does not deserve to be remotely this high. I was talking about Baby most of that time after all. However, the reason she makes top 10, much less number 6, is because there really aren't any other good candidates in GT. GT has 5 good villains if we're being honest. This list is less of a top 10 so much as a top 5 and top 5 honorable mentions. Eis Shenron is the twin brother of Nova Shenron, with them being recolors of each other, and having similar elements. Nova Shenron is fire, while Eis Shenron is ice, as his name would imply. Despite that incredibly generic-sounding name, they tried to make it original by spelling it in an arbitrary way, E-I-S rather than I-C-E. But I'd say that only makes his name even worse. The reasoning for some of these stupid names is because each of the 7 dragons has their name start with one of the letters in Shenron. Omega Shenron is technically called Sin Shenron when he's introduced to be the S, but he changes his name 5 seconds later to Omega, so that's pretty pointless. It just leaves us with a bunch of really awkward names.
We have an ice villain. His name has to start with an E. What do we call him?
Ice?
Good enough.
Being a recolor of Nova isn't doing Ice many favors in the design department either. If they wanted that family connection, it wouldn't be a stretch to just say all of the Shadow Dragons are related. As a standalone design, I'd say the 2 gargoyle-looking Shadow Dragons are mostly fine, outside of those very awkward pink lips that show up on way too many Dragon Ball designs. Both of their voices are also quite bad, with Nova sounding like a generic gravelly voice anyone can imitate, while Eis just sounds like an awkwardly ordinary person.
I thought you'd be done with him by now, brother. Having trouble.
Stand down, this is my fight.
Nova Shenron starts out trying to fight Goku, but he's a noble dragon just looking for an honorable fight. He never does anything even remotely evil outside of wanting a fight, even outright saying that he doesn't approve of killing innocents. On the other hand, he does plenty of acts of good, fighting against both Eis and Omega Shenron, so I'm not ranking him on this list because he's blatantly a good guy and not a villain. When Eis Shenron shows up, he immediately tells Nova to stop doing all of this honorable stuff and to just murder Goku. He does make a pretty powerful entrance when he manages to freeze Goku over entirely, completely disabling him. He threatens to kill Nova along with Goku if his brother doesn't finish him off, but, of course, Nova frees Goku instead of killing him. This was Eis's only real opportunity to win the fight, and he threw it by trusting his brother. Even if Nova tried to kill Goku here, like Eis wanted, Nova has fire powers. He would probably just mildly injure Goku while freeing him from the ice and making them lose. Goku claims he can't be hit by Eis's attack twice when he tries to use his freeze laser on him for the second time, but he still somehow hits Goku with it while he's 1,000 feet in the air. Apparently, the reason he hits is because he's hiding behind his brother so Goku can't counterattack, but I don't see how it's so hard for Goku to just casually get out of the way. Regardless, Goku just generically muscles his way out of the ice this time, which renders Eis Shenron's only particularly good attack useless. Goku then easily beats Eis up after this, forcing Eis to beg for his life. The only reason Goku chooses to spare him is because of his brother deciding to stick up for him. Predictably, Eis Shenron just uses this opportunity to attack Goku and blinds him with his ice, after which he's casually killed anyway because Dragonball characters don't need to see when they can just sense people with ki. At this point in the series, with everybody having power levels in the millions and having full control over ki, you'd think Eis Shenron would know that, but no. If Eis had just been slightly more patient, Omega would show up 5 minutes later to carry him in this fight. That said, because Omega's fight takes place immediately after Eis Shenron's, he does have something of a legacy. Goku keeps his loss of eyesight during the entirety of his fight with Omega, so at least Eis did something useful, which is more than what most GT villains can say. Eis Shenron's purpose is basically just to build the character of his brother, but Nova's main rival at the end of the day ends up being Omega rather than Eis. Both of them chide Nova for being a goody two-shoes weakling, and one shows up immediately after the other one dies, so Eis kinda just comes across as being an unnecessary middleman between Nova and Omega. Eis doesn't really have much character beyond being edgy and has significantly worse powers and design than Omega, so I can't say I'm too sad he was replaced. Eis manages to get 2 episodes rather than just 1, but he's only really in half of those 2 episodes, as the other halves are dedicated to Nova and Omega. His second episode is named after Omega, so he's pretty much just a hype man for him. It really only totals to about 1 episode's worth of screen time, whereas Naturon Shenron has 2 episodes fully dedicated to himself and himself alone. Naturon and Eis are pretty similar in how they're both edgy characters who use cowardly methods, but Naturon is significantly more threatening and less generic by comparison. This is the best villain of the Black Star Dragon Ball saga, filled with episodic antagonists, even if that's not saying much. Muchi looks like a design out of Dragon Quest more so than Dragon Ball, reminiscent of the many cult leaders from that series like Hargon and Labcha. Design-wise, I'd say he's the most original looking of any of the GT villains. His voice actor is surprisingly good too, even if it is incredibly cheesy. He shares his voice actor with Super Boo, and uses the same inflection in his voice for it. And for what it's worth, I think he does a better job and sounds more fitting on this character. Boo is obviously a much better villain than this random guy, but the voice makes him sound more threatening rather than less threatening.
For your sake, I hope you brought some insurance to back up your claims. But knowing you, Goku, you probably don't even know what insurance means.
Silence! One of our journeymen has returned with a Dragon Ball. Don't just stand there! You did bring a Dragon Ball, didn't you?
Muchi is the main man behind the cult of Lord Blue, making all of the followers bow down to him and hang on to every single word he says. He sends mercenaries out to get the Dragon Balls for him, and turns them into dolls to feed to Lord Blue to increase his power when they fail. Everyone is terrified of him, and these scenes are pretty entertaining, providing good build-up to him and his arc. Like a true cult leader, Muchi regularly implies that everyone will eventually be sacrificed to Lud, and that everyone who is turned into fuel for his master is lucky to have played such an important role in their afterlife.
In life he was a failure, but in death this journeyman has achieved greatness because his vital energy has been absorbed by Lord Lud himself. Let us beg of Lud that our end might be just as glorious as his. Well, when I say beg, I mean now!
While Lord Lud might or might not have some sentience, Cardinal Muchi seems to have complete control over him, and he's just a robot that can't speak anyway. So it's clear this is definitely a sham with nothing in it for the followers. By comparison to Muchi, the Shadow Dragons don't have any build-up, which is the main problem with them. Although they have significantly better payoff with their fight scenes, obviously. The most likable trait of Muchi is the main people he threatens are the Power brothers, the most memorably bad villains in GT. The brothers successfully steal a Dragon Ball for him, but he provides them with no reward because he's outraged that they only took one of the 2 Dragon Balls the protagonist had on them, sending them out again and threatening to turn them into dolls if they fail him. The fear he instills into them goes a long way, to the point they even start crying at the prospect of having to return in front of him before Muchi gives them their much-deserved punishment. Muchi seems to have 100% control over Lord Lud in his base form, directing Lud's laser beams to kill people at will. He successfully hits Pan with the lasers, turning her into a doll, and is shockingly actually intelligent enough to keep firing the lasers at Goku and Trunks when they arrive. He almost hits them several times, but one of the shots hits some of the cultists when it misses. Muchi doesn't care. He was just going to do that to them later anyway. Muchi is clearly on a lower power level without using Lud's lasers, but he does use his whip and gun to defend himself for some shocking competency for what appears to be a low-level villain. He even sticks some large lion robot on Goku, even though that unfortunately gets deleted in 2 seconds. This is GT though, so all good things have to come to an end. Eventually, Muchi decides to transform into another form and blows up, the new form just being called Muchi. It is vaguely implied that this new form is a separate character from Muchi. Apparently, Muchi is just the whip, and he deforms out of it into a much worse design with a different, much more generic voice actor, looking like a yellow recolor of V's 3rd form. Seeing the lower power level villain who relied on technology was actually interesting. This form is a much more generic Dragon Ball antagonist. He does at least keep the protagonist busy for a while and has some powers like whipping tentacle arms and psychic levitation. So he's not a complete pushover. I would say whip arms are significantly less cool than an actual whip though, as they seem much more cartoony and less brutal. He does at least put them to good use, having one of the longest fight scenes of any of the GT villains. As far as how he dies, he's casually blown up by a generic ki blast of all things with virtually no build-up. I hadn't even realized he died when I watched this the first time. He stops using Lud's lasers once he goes to the yellow form, which is a very stupid mistake given that's his main trump card. He's apparently very frail, so he really needs his own instant kill move to level the playing field. I like to assume this Frieza recolor is just a transformation for Muchi, but it's hard to ignore how bad the idea of them being separate characters is to potentially ruin this otherwise perfectly serviceable villain. If they're really 2 people, why does Muchi allow himself to be carried around like a whip? That can't be an enjoyable state to be in for days on end. According to this dialogue from a random cultist, this cult has been going on for at least 23 years. This transformation is obviously one way and not reversible, So that makes 23 years of the supposedly separate character of Muchi just staying dormant in this form of a whip while the Cardinal lives his life. Somehow I doubt that's the case. It's also weird that while he briefly talks in the form of the whip, as incredibly stupid as that is, that he talks with the Cardinal Super Boo voice, not the generic raspy Frieza recolor voice. This is probably just an error, but you can technically use this to argue that they are in fact the same person. It really does add insult to injury that he just voluntarily blows up his first form rather than using the yellow form as a desperation tactic. You would think that would be his preferred state to be in, given that's how he walked around when he wasn't fighting, along with the fact it's, not a yellow Frieza. I guess having a form that's a recolor does make him even more like some Dragon Quest mid-boss though. Haze has a rather comedic and eccentric personality that I would say misses more often than it hits. His design is already really goofy, so seeing him do very exaggerated poses is awkward. Despite his goofy personality and appearance though, he has some surprisingly intellectual word choices, calling the protagonist astute for realizing how his powers work, and referring to Goku as a philosopher for disagreeing with his plan to destroy the Earth.
I'll figure out a way to beat you. I am not going to let you poison the Earth!
Why not? Humankind is doing that on its own anyway, isn't it? I'm only going to speed up the process.
Your evil deeds are the poison that makes you weak!
Well, a philosopher, what do you know?
He's definitely a weird character. Haze's power set is poison that slowly seeps into his victims and drains them of their powers, similar to how Lavender would later work in Dragon Ball Super. Haze honestly seems even more powerful than Lavender, because he doesn't have to land any kind of attack to get his poison to start working. Simply being in his presence is all that it takes, as that will start infecting people and poisoning them to death. Like he has some kind of poison aura or something. The thing that makes absolutely no sense about his powers is that the protagonists don't realize this, and don't even seem to be in any pain, but they get weaker and weaker the longer they're with him somehow. Those are some awfully convenient plot powers he has. Haze Shenron has a very low power level for this point in the series, but his poison can reduce his enemies to power levels below his. Haze's plan is to just stall for time while his poison works its magic. He specifically taunts Pan, presumably because Pan is much weaker than Goku, to attack him. He gets the stuffing beat out of him for quite a while, but manages to tank the hits until eventually Pan gets weak enough he can block and even counterattack against her. Apparently this power decrease is percentage based rather than some kind of raw number decrease, because it also makes Goku weak enough for him to defeat somehow, preventing Goku from even entering his Super Saiyan 1 form. After just a few minutes of being in Haze's presence, Goku and Pan are so pathetically weak that he can just casually hold them by one limb and they can't resist him at all. This is honestly one of the most overpowered abilities of any of the dragons. If Omega Shenron turned this on later to its full effect, he would easily win. We can see Omega covering the whole planet with Haze Shenron's poison, but it's obviously not nearly as strong as when Haze uses it because of plot reasons. While Haze's plan ultimately works out for him, it was definitely a risky play to allow himself to get beat up, since Pan does inflict some damage on him earlier on before she gets weakened. And if Goku had decided to help, he'd be dead instantly. What would have made much more sense would just be to engage them in conversation for as long as possible and pretend to be peaceful. The poison is so overpowered that its victims don't even feel they're weakened. So this apparently would have worked. Haze later does waste some of Goku's time by talking about his origin, but this is after Goku already knows how his powers work. So the fact Goku sits and stupidly listens to him stalling for time is idiotic and terrible writing. After Goku and Pan are completely helpless and at Haze's mercy, he throws them into a polluted pool of poison, saying that it will incinerate their bones to nothing and kill them. After he throws them in, they eventually manage to make their way to an unpolluted part of the lake, which somehow magically cures them of all of the poison because Haze Shenron's powers are extremely poorly defined and terribly written. Haze doesn't even leave them in the lake and go to make an exit to do something else like a Bond villain during this time. It's actually worse than that. Haze is sitting above the lake, waiting for Goku to die, even though he cannot observe the progress. After they come out at full power, Haze makes a run for it and is casually executed in one attack. Even assuming Haze doesn't know about his overpowered ability's weakness, since he was born yesterday, he's still stupid for not taking a more direct hand in making sure his opponents die. He should be standing there with his hands on Goku and Pan, drowning them in the lake rather than just casually sitting up here and waiting. Besides, it would give him more opportunities to taunt them. Pan's robot friend Giru was unaffected by Haze's poison, and Haze stupidly just attacks him once to send him into the water, where he saves Goku and Pan, not thinking anything of that either. This guy has ridiculously strong powers where he can kill people by doing nothing, so he really has nobody to blame but himself here. I know there's not much way that Goku can survive this encounter otherwise from a writing perspective if Haze is so powerful, but his abilities being written in this way in the first place is stupid. Sugoro is the villain of a random gimmick episode in the middle of nowhere, where Goku is banished to some form of hell during the middle of the Baby arc. It's incredibly jarring and shows hints of the terrible Black Star Dragonball saga from the start of the series. Sugoro forces Goku to play against him in a game of luck that is basically just Candyland. Roll the dice and hope you land on good spaces to get rewards rather than bad spaces to get tortured. Sugoro gloats over Goku's constant misfortune and bad luck, and for what that's worth, watching that is more enjoyable than some of the other bad villains in the show. Obviously, Sugoro is not just generically lucky, as he has rigged the game in his favor. He and his son are shapeshifters, and he has his son assume the form of the dice that's rolled throughout the entire game. They've memorized the board layout, so his son always knows what numbers to make show up on the dice. He's apparently done this 32 million times. This could potentially be an outright good villain if the show portrayed him as one more directly, and if he fought Goku after the dice game. I'd be 100% down for that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Goku eventually finds out Sugoro's son and calls him out for cheating. You'd think that wouldn't matter given this is some sort of dimension where Goku can't fight, but it is then revealed that Sugoro is not the one in charge of this dimension, but some abstract gods we never see that are only heard as disembodied voices. These gods are outraged at Sugoro for messing with the natural order, as they are obsessed with chants. I would even take this if this god was some sort of actual character who showed up afterwards for a second episode or something, but of course that's not the case, they're just non-characters. Goku just helps Sugoro and his son escape from the dimension, and that's the end of this episode's arc. Sugoro himself is just a victim of this dimension like anyone else. All he did was come up with something to rig the dimension and keep himself and his son from dying. You could easily argue he's not a villain here given he's just trying to survive, but he's laughing way too much at the misfortune of Goku here, who he entirely assumes is going to get killed. How could you say he's not a bad guy after that? Again, he's apparently done this 32 million times. You would think he would just be really bored by this point. I guess it made him insane and psychotic instead. While generic, I think Sugoro's design as the teal alien is fine for what it is, as some stereotypical old Japanese goblin man. However, after they're done playing the game, he and his son reveal their true forms as really, really ugly green mole alien people. I can like ugly mole characters. I like Naturon Shenron after all, but these guys are very unappealingly ugly. I know that his son had to have shape-shifting powers through the plot, but why are they randomly mole people? It just adds some unnecessary weirdness for the sake of it, something GT does a lot. Clearly, this episode wasn't weird enough as is. After his episode, Sugoro sticks around as a generic background cheerleader with Elder Kai, further tarnishing his villain legacy. He changes his design exactly when he becomes unlikable and loses his villain status. It's almost like the designs are two separate characters. That wraps up the top 10, but I fully intend to cover all of GT's villains. If you thought some of those guys lower down were bad, I've got news for you. I'm going to be covering ones far worse in the next video. We've still got 14 entries to go, after all. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. If you're wondering where Super 17 is, that's where I'll tell you I think he fails as a villain. But enough about my own opinions. Who do you think are the best and worst among GT's Rogues Gallery? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.